Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Dar. Welcome in a night between myth and reality. Also, the speaker of this lecture, he's also his character itself, been talked about between myth and reality. Professor Christian Roman, one of the leading scholars in the field of Arabian history. He's the founder of the French Center for Research in Sana'a. And in presenting such a myth, it will take the whole day to cite his contribution for our field. But I am sure that he is one of those who will be always remembered as a myth in such field, as a myth to know all of this language and to gather his contribution and speak. And this is what I do when I speak about Roman, that he wrote about almost hundreds of things. So we are facing a myth, but in reality, he led many different projects in the history of Arabia, in the history of Yemen, in the history of Najran, and he's involved now in many projects, but he's also involved with al-Athar, al-Islamiyyah, for many years in different type of projects. We're honored to have him with us tonight. The subject that he will address is also between myth and reality. I will not take time to stop him from being the stage. Brown, to have you.
Thank you for the kind words. And I remember the first conference, it was in 2014, and I presented the elephants of Hima, and it was a subject of a surprise. And thank you for the invitation in this prestigious institution. My problem is only the English. I am sorry to speak so badly, so I'll read my paper and not speak spontaneously as I did normally. There is no need to introduce King Abraha. He is the archetype of the evil king who parades with an elephant and attacks a monument emblematic of the Muslim faith. In Ethiopia, however, Abraha is quite different. He is a young child, the twin brother of Asbaha, both revered by Christian Ethiopians as saints. The Abraha of Islam and that of Ethiopia are so wrapped up in fables and wonder that it's questionable whether he is really a historical figure. My purpose this evening will be first to confirm that Abraha is indeed a historical figure. It will also, and above all, illustrate that we know a lot about him today. We can even claim that Abraha was one of the most important rulers in the history of ancient Arabia. He was a talented adventurer whose fate is quite similar to that of Bonaparte 13 centuries later. For a long time, European science has known that Abraha was an historical figure. He was based on one of the most famous Byzantine historians, Procopius, who came from the port of Caesarea in Palestine. Procopius, in fact, devotes a long development to Abraha in his work entitled The Wars of Justinian. We will return to this text often in our presentation. Justinian was an emperor who reigned for almost 30 years, from 527 to 565. It was during his reign that Christianity fragmented into antagonistic churches, each with its own hierarchy. The Empress Theodora played an important role in this schism by supporting the dissident movement. Procopius was a high official in the Byzantine state. He participates in particular in the military campaigns against Sassanid Persia as a senior officer in the entourage of the general-in-chief, who is called Belisarius. Thanks to his position, he has access to the diplomatic archives and he is particularly well informed about the actions undertaken by the emperor and their motivations. The publication date of Procopius' work is in the early 550s, very shortly after the events. For these two reasons, Procopius is a particularly well-informed and reliable source. He is also an intellectual with a keen interest in classical literature who writes his wars using a model, the Peloponnesian War of the Greek author Thucydides, who had lived 9 centuries earlier in the second half of the 5th century BC. Procopius describes in particular the accession to power of Abraha, which occurred shortly after 531, probably between 532 and 535. The historical character of Abraha was confirmed in the 1880s by archaeological research in Arabia. The return of the Ottomans to Yemen opened the door for adventurers to explore the country. The most active of these was a self-taught Bohemian named Edward Glaser. Bohemia, now in Czech Republic, belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Glaser was therefore an Austrian. He made 4 expeditions to Yemen. On the 3rd, he went to Marib, the former capital of the Kingdom of Sabah, 120 kilometers east of Sana'a, in March, April 1888, and make many discoveries there. One of the most spectacular is a pillar 2.5 meters high, found next to the famous Marib Dam. The 4 sides of this pillar are entirely covered by a long text in Sabaean script and language. This language had been deciphered for about 15 years at that time, at the time of Glaser. Glaser understands that the sponsor of this text is the famous Abraha king, King Abraha. He published his discovery in 1897, less than 10 years after his brief stay in Marib. A second Abraha inscription was discovered in 1951 at the wells of Muran in southwestern Saudi Arabia. This is the place of Muran, 200 kilometers north of Najran, the wadi with the wells of Muran, and the inscription, which is about 10 meters above the sand level. A third mentioning Abraha and found at the same location was published in 1988. This is donc this text. A fourth is from 2004. I discovered the 5th and the 6th, published in 2012 and 2018. This is the 5th and the 6th. Finally, I attributed to Abraha a fragmentary inscription in which the name of the sponsor is not mentioned. So today, we have 7 documents, most of them discovered in the last 25 years. Around 475, Christian era, the kingdom of Himyar, with its capital in Yemen, was the major power in Arabia. Its territory extended to the Medina region in the north and to the mouth of Euphrates River in the northeast. The territory of modern Yemen is probably Himyarite about this time. It is again 75 years later. The king of Himyar has been Jewish for more than 100 years, but the official religion of the kingdom was a neutral monotheism inspired by Judaism. As a result of internal dissension, both political and religious in nature, the throne of Himyar became vacant. The African kingdom of Aksum, which is Christian, intervenes militarily in Arabia and places Himyarite princes who are Christian on the throne of Himyar. Himyar then becomes a tributary kingdom of Aksum. But the third Christian king imposed by Aksum is Christian only in appearance. His name is Masruq, and he takes the name of Yusuf when he became king. This is the famous Dhunuwas of Arab tradition. As soon as he is installed on the throne, Joseph revolts and sets out to massacre all the Christian Emirates aligned with Aksum and Byzantium. Thus, in November 523, he massacred a few hundred Christian Najranites, since then called the Martyrs of Najran. The Aksumite Negus, who is called Caleb, retaliates vigorously by gathering a large army of some 7,000 men who crossed the Red Sea on 70 mostly Roman ships. During the landing, Joseph is killed and the kingdom of Himyar is conquered. The Negus chooses a new Christian king, but this time he takes precautions. When he withdraws, he leaves a large army to keep control of the country. It is then that the epic of Abraha begins. The Aksumite army, stationed in Yemen, revolts and offers the royal crown to Abraha, who is one of these two leaders. Obviously, the Negus of Aksum is furious and reacts with energy. We know from Procopius that he sent two retaliatory expeditions, both of which failed miserably. I read the text. When Elestaios learned this, he was eager to punish Abramos together with those who had revolted with him for their injustice to Esimiphaios, and he sent against them an army of 3,000 men with one of his relatives as commander. This army, once there, was no longer willing to return home, but they wished to remain where they were as in a goodly land, and so without the knowledge of their commander, they opened a negotiation with Abramos. Then, when they came to an engagement with their opponents, just as the fighting began, they killed their commander and joined the ranks of the enemy, and so remained there. But Elestaios was greatly moved with anger and sent still another army against them. This force engaged with Abramos and his men, and after suffering a severe defeat in the battle, straightway returned home. Thereafter, the king of Ethiopians became afraid and sent no further expedition against Abramius. The Arab tradition reports that Abraha revolted and stopped recognizing the Negus as his ruler. The Negus then sent an army to Yemen to regain control of the country and punish Abraha. The leader of this army is called Aryat. Abraha and Aryat agree to settle their differences by a single combat. Abraha prevails by using unfair stratagems. One of his servants, who had been hiding, pierces Aryat with his spear. The Negus Caleb becomes enraged, and swears to avenge Aryat by spilling Abraha's blood and trampling the land of Yemen. Abraha, who wishes to pacify his relations with the Negus, has him send a vessel containing some of his blood and a bag of Yemeni soil. Thanks to this stratagem, he frees the Negus from his oath and obtains his pardon without losing his power. Both sources agree that Caleb fails to regain control of Yemen. It is clear that Abraha was able to secure an unwavering support of his troops. Abraha's rise to power occurred, as I said, between 532 and 535. Procopius gives us some details on the origins of Abraha. He would be a Christian, a slave of the Roman from the Ethiopian city of Adulis, who had a job in maritime trade. He is, therefore, an Ethiopian Christian of Servile origin. Arabic sources similarly consider Abraha to be an Abyssinian, Habashi, it is an Ethiopian. The name Abraha is indeed Ethiopian. The word Abraha is the Ethiopian verb meaning to enlighten. This word is formed on the same root as the Arabic burhan, proof. Abraha is a Christian, as evidenced by his inscriptions. But he is really a slave? Is it possible at that time for a slave to become an army leader? One can doubt it. When he came to power in Yemen, Abraha was in a very unstable position. He was a foreign military officer at the head of an occupying army, what was guilty of numerous massacres. He is a Christian, while the elites of the kingdom are Jewish. His chances of political survival seems infinitesimal. In fact, for 15 years, Abraha did not have any inscriptions engraved. This is certainly because the population of his kingdom do not recognize his legitimacy. Everything changes in 448, nearly 14 years after his accession to power. In an ostentatious inscription, Abraha makes it known that he is accepted by his own people and recognized internationally. Abraha was then in Marib. He had been campaigning for 11 months. First, he worked to put down a revolt by the prince of Kinda, whose name was Yazid ibn Kabsha, and Sabaean nobles. Then he was called to help by the people of Marib because the famous Marib Dam has just broken. While waiting for the arrival of the workmen, he had a church consecrated in March, served by the abbot of the monastery. But as soon as the work of repairing the dam had begun, it had to be suspended because of the plague. While Abraha was still in Marib, a diplomatic conference was held under the auspices of the Aksumite delegation, which arrived first. This is the text describing the diplomatic conference. The delegation of the King of Romans, the ambassador of the King of Persia, and the envoys of 3 Arab princes, al-Mundhir of Iraq, Haref, son of Jabalah of Syria, and his brother Abi Karib, son of Jabalah, arrived second. The conference recognizes the royal title of Abraha on condition that he pays allegiance to the Negus. Moreover, he settled the affairs of Arabia by recognizing Abraha's right to reconquer all the former Himyarite territories. The conference was able to take place because the Negus Caleb, who did not want to hear from Abraha anymore, died. His successor was willing to pass the buck and recognize Abraha as the king of Himyar, if Abraha would pay him tribute. It was this compromise that was endorsed at Marib in December 547. Immediately after the conference, the work on the dam was completed in 2 months. The triumph of Abraha was complete. Abraha wants to celebrate it immediately with a beautiful inscription. But the first attempt is pitiful. It's the inscriptions on the left. It's a text engraved on a pillar much smaller than the pillar of the 5th century Himyarite king, which is next door. Abraha orders this first attempt to be thrown away and buried in the sand at the foot of the dam. The second attempt is much more satisfactory. It's a superb pillar, 2.5 meters high, as I said, with all four sides covered by carefully carved text. It places Abraha on a par with the great Himyarite kings of the past centuries. In the military realm, Arab Muslim scholarly tradition records that Abraha launched an expedition for the purpose of destroying the Kaaba of Mecca because the Kaaba competed with the church he had built in Sana'a. I will return to this point later. I would like to mention now another much less known but certainly historic military operation. The ascent to the Najd. The ascent to the Najd. This operation was revealed by an inscription found in 1951. It was then discovered that it was alluded to in certain traditions and in ancient Arabic poetry. I begin with the 1951 inscriptions. It was discovered by an archaeological operation in the southern part of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, funded by King Abdul Aziz. It is located above the wells of Muran, 200 kilometers north of Najran. This is the Belgian mission in Muran. The text they found, its author, who is King Abraha himself, relates that he launched a fourth campaign in Desert Arabia against the Banu Amr, who had revolted. The Himyarite army is divided into two columns. The first wins the victory in the Wadi Dhumarah, and the second in a wadi at the waters of Turaban. They are relatively commonplace names, so their location in Najd is not entirely certain. Following these victories, Abraha went to the Najd to Haliban, a small locality 300 kilometers southwest of Riyadh. The name is also vocalized Huluban, Haliban or Huluban. This is the position of Huluban. The Ma'ad tribal confederation pledges allegiance to him and surrenders hostages. Nothing is said of the revolting Banu Amr who probably fled, but it is stated that Prince Amr, son of King al-Mundhir, makes his submission and hands over his son as a hostage. This Amr is a famous character. He is the son of King al-Mundhir, who then rules the city of Al-Hira in Lower Euphrates Valley. His mother is the Kindid princess Hind, daughter of Al-Harith the king. The inscription dates the expedition between April and December 552. At this time, Amr is crown prince. He became king 2 years later in 554 upon the death of his father and reigned for about 15 years. At first, it was thought that the Banu Amr were the tribe Banu Amr ben Sa'sa'a. Ambiguities in the text have led to the belief that Abraha actually suffered a failure, and he camouflaged as a success. The Israeli scholar Menahem Kister has even taken the hypothesis a step further by identifying this expedition of Abraha with the famous campaign against Mecca in the year of the elephant. Indeed, a tradition reported by Ibn al-Kalbi dates the elephant campaign in 552. In 2008, I went to the wells of Muran and tried to find the 1951 inscription. While searching for it, I came across a second inscription that ruined this reconstruction. This second inscription, also engraved by Abraha, proclaims the submission of the entire northern peninsula from the Arabian Gulf to the Gulf of Al-Aqaba. The regions that submit are, this is a text, a detail, the word Yathrib. So from the east to the east, Hajar and Khat, today Al-Hufuf and Al-Uqair, the port of Al-Hufuf, Tai, Yathrib, and Judam. The text is undated, but can be placed between December 552 and June 554. The epigraphic texts thus reveal that Abraha reconquered the entire Arabian Peninsula between 552 and 554. Abraha went in person to Haliban in the Najd. His itinerary is sketched by the distribution of inscriptions that he commissioned or that mention him. One is in Hima, 100 kilometers north of Najran. And three others in Muran, 200 kilometers north of Najran. The triumph of Abraha is allusively referred by two traditionists in the notice they devoted to a tribal chief, Sayyid, of the Banu Kalb, a tribe in northern Arabia. This chief of the Banu Kalb is called Zuhair ibn Janab. The first traditionist is Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani, well-known Abu al-Faraj. This is a view of Hima, the text of Abu al-Faraj, in the famous book of songs in Arabic, Kitab al-Aghani. According to a tradition attributed to Abu Amr al-Shibani, when Abraha went up to the Najd, Zuhair ibn Janab presented himself to him. Abraha honored him, gave him preference over the other Arabs who had come up, and made him the emir of the two sons of Wail, Taghlib and Bakr. The territory of Taghlib and Bakr tribes extends into the lower Iraq and northeast Arabia. Incidentally, this text indicates that northeastern Arabia, and thus Kuwait, belonged to Abraha's empire at the time and had Zuhair ibn Janab, the Sayyid of the Banu Kalb, as its governor. The second traditionist is Ibn Qutayba in Ash-Shi'r wa Shu'ara. He confirms that Zuhair ibn Janab offered his services to Abraha, but without mentioning either the name of the king or the place of the meeting. When the Abyssinians came with the intention of destroying the temple, Zuhair went out to meet their king. Abraha honored him and sent him to the side of the Iraq to invite its inhabitants to submit to him. Three pre-Islamic poets mention this expedition or its results. The first is Tarafa ibn al-Abd, a poet descended from Bakr and contemporary of Abraha. The poet, staying in Najran, would warn a Hanafite from the Najd of Abraha's intention to invade his country. I don't give the text in Arabic because my PDF is not good quality. Will you give Qatada a sign for caution? Should save you in Najran, the kings made a decision. If only a raven in the sky had warned you, there are two armies, one approaching the Kaaba and the other, if you don't cross the sea, coming to you. The second poet is Musayyib ibn al-Rifl, a descendant of Zuhair ibn Janab, the Sayyid of Banu Kalb already mentioned, who is said to have lived in the first half of the 8th century AD, Islamic period. In a fragment of 5 verses, he boasts of being descended from a tribal chief whom Abraha had honored with the government of the Bakrentali tribes. And Abraha, who had chosen us, he made us rulers as a kingly reward. He shared half of his reign with Zuhair, and there was no ruler than him in the matter of ruling, he appointed him over the two tribes of Marad, he appointed him over the people of Highland. The two sons of Wael, Idest Bakrenterlib, humiliating them, bringing them back despite readiness for war. The third poet, more interesting, is al-Mukhabbal al-Sa'di, descended from Sa'd of Tamim, the cantor of Tamim, who is said to have died during the reign of Omar, so beginning of Islamic period. Two pieces relate to Abraha. In the first, which is only 2 lines, the poet boasts of all the support his tribe, along with the princes of Yemen, gave to Abraha in Huluban. Now, according to the first Muran inscription, it is precisely in Haliban that Abraha receives the allegiance of Ma'ad. They decided for Abraha the actions of war. The place of it was Huluban, and they rushed with the princes, Muharrik and the two al-Harith. Both of them were our partners in kinship and possession. So here we have Huluban and Abraha in the piece. In the second piece of al-Mukhabbal al-Sa'di, which has 44 verses, there is again mention to Abraha, who is here referred to as Abu Yaksum. The poet seems to be referring to a battle on the day of Abu Yaksum in Huluban and the allegiance of Ma'ad. This is the text. And on the day of Abu Yaksum, when the people were present at Haliban, after its products were commanded, we closed against them the gate of the fortress, in front of which was a prince whose chiefs went forth with the javelins. These verses of al-Mukhabbal al-Sa'di constitute the most reliable literary mention of Abraha rise in the Najd. Huluban enjoyed a certain notoriety at that time, as shown by another mention in ancient poetry by Jarir. The ascent to the Najd that is revealed by the text can also be reconstructed through the images. The wells of Muran are located in a ravine bordered by granite hills. This stone, which is very hard, is difficult to engrave. In general, inscriptions and drawings are rare in granite arrays and more often painted than engraved. The wells of Muran are an exception. They are surrounded by hundreds of drawings and engraved text. But the Muran drawings are very different from those usually found in the region. They are only horsemen, whereas usually one finds hieratic figures and a wide range of domestic and wild animals. Moreover, these riders have a very particular style which is not found elsewhere. Their horse is reared. This is one of the examples of pre-Islamic horse found in Hima. Islamic horses, and this is a style of the horses of Muran, which are certainly connected with the army of Abraha. These features lead to the conclusion that all the texts and drawings of Muran, with a few rare exceptions, were engraved by Abraha's troops, who must have stayed there for a long time. Abraha's horsemen at Muran number about 40. They are elegantly represented, but without concern for realism. Often, the legs are not represented. It's the case here. Here, no legs also. Here, apparently no legs. No legs also. No legs, we have only the trunk of the horseman. To judge, often the legs are not represented. The horsemen of Abraha allow us to visualize the equipment of high-ranking soldiers in the 6th century. They don't wear any protection, helmet, cuirass of chainmail. Nor do they have heavy steel swords. Some wield a spear, but many seem to float backwards with some kind of ribbon. I wondered if it was a sling, but this hypothesis is difficult because the slingers were never mounted on horses. This is a man with a spear, and a man with this kind of ribbon, perhaps a sling. To judge the armament in the 6th century, we also have 3 successive portraits of an Emirate officer called Tamim Yazid. In 521, he is depicted dressed in a loin cloth and armed with a spear. In June 523, he is depicted dressed in a loincloth and armed. In June 523, he has a long sword in a scabbard attached to his waist. In July 523, he carries only a sword. This is, in the middle, the image of Tamim. He has risen in rank. If we generalize these meager observations, it appears that the armament is very rudimentary, except for the senior officers who have a sword. Abraha horsemen are not only found in Muran, where there are 3 inscriptions mentioning Abraha. One horseman is known at Hima, where there is an inscription mentioning Abraha. There is also one at Turban. A splendid granite massif 210 kilometers northeast of Muran toward the Nejd. Even more extraordinary, a Frenchman living in Saudi Arabia, Mr. Florent Egal, who systematically explores these regions, has just discovered a new one at Essaouira, exactly halfway between Muran and Riyadh. Donc, we have the horse of Abraha, and near the horse, the name Anazat associated. And on all the design I present now, we have this particularity, Li'anazat. And the leg is represented here. Li'anazat. The leg is represented also. The connection between the horseman and the inscription here is not sure. So we have one in Hima. We have 3 in Muran. A new time, Anazat. Here we are in Turban. This is the granite mountains in Turban, very impressive. So we have 200 kilometers more in direction of the north. And the last one is this one in Essaouira. And Essaouira is 200 kilometers north of Turban. So we are halfway between Hima and Riyadh. These 4 sites between Najran and the Nejd draw the route of the Anazat horseman, a man or a unit of the cavalry of Abraha's army, called the Anazat. They thus confirm the reality of the ascent to the Nejd and probably give the way followed by Abraham himself. One last detail is of importance. There are 3 drawings in Hima of an elephant with his mahout. Among the Emirate or foreign kings who are likely to have passed through Hima, only the Aksumite Abraha can reasonably have a period with an elephant, which is, by the way, the animal emblematic of power in Africa, but not in Arabia. We can therefore assume that Abraha passed through Hima with an elephant. It's quite unlikely that the elephant ventured between Hima and the Nejd, which is in an extremely deserted and completely empty region. The elephant must have been based in Najran, probably the only city favorable to Arabia. And the two other designs of the elephant. It remains to examine the famous expedition of Abraha against Mecca and the end of the reign. There are, unfortunately, events for which there is nothing new. I will quickly present the pieces of the file. On the side of the epigraphic documentation, the information dries up in 560, the date of the last dated inscription, the one that would commemorate the construction of Al-Khalis. If the expedition against Mecca is historical, it is necessarily later than 560. On the external side, the Byzantine chronicles shed light on Abraha's reign until around 550. Thereafter, they only mention the fall of the Aksumite dynasty in Arabia around 570. The dislocation of the Himyarite kingdom that follows the fall of the Aksumite dynasty is confirmed by the Arabic Islamic scholarly tradition, which places it around 575. This tradition further indicates that two sons of Abraha succeeded each other on the throne. The hypothetical expedition against Mecca is therefore most probably situated in the years following 560, i.e. around 565, if one wanted to give an approximate date. Tradition records that Abraha launches a campaign in western Arabia with the intention of destroying the Kaaba that competes with the Church of Sana'a. His army is preceded by an elephant, but the elephant, as it reaches its goals, refuses to advance, and the army is miraculously destroyed. Abraha flees and dies on the way back to Yemen or on his arrival in Sana'a. This story raises three questions. First, in the earliest texts, those of Ibn Ishaq and Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, the details of the expedition show great differences. Second, all the poetic fragments supposedly commemorating the event are either dubious or clearly pastiches. Third, Abraha's elephant was a parade elephant, a parade animal, not a war elephant. It is unlikely that it participated in military campaigns which already pose serious stewardship problems for men and animals. The account of Ibn Hisham that has emerged is clearly a reconstruction that combines diverse materials, probably in relation to the search of what Surah 105, Al-Fil, means. A first element is the memory of an event involving an elephant whose sight impressed the people in Mecca. In Mecca, the year of the elephant was the starting point for counting the years. It was then said 10 years or 20 years after the year of the elephant. A second element in the recollection is the recollection that King Sabra's army was wiped out, not in battle, but as a result of a curse, probably an epidemic. The king himself, stricken by disease, ended up miserable. The final redaction brought these two elements together and constructed a narrative in relation with the Kaaba, a narrative that was likely to illuminate the meaning of the very elusive surah in which the companions of an elephant were mentioned. Abraha's expedition against Mecca has long seemed likely because it offered a plausible explanation for the dislocation of Himyar's kingdom, but it is by no means assured of being historical. As for the policy that Abraha adopted in the management of this kingdom, little is known, except on one point, religious policy. It must be remembered that Abraha is a Christian in a kingdom whose population is Jewish. If he wants to last, he must obtain the support, or at least the benevolent neutrality, of a part of the Jews. He did this by changing the official wording of the profession of faith. During Abraha's predecessor, this profession was, it's better to give the text, in the name of Rahmanan. Rahmanan is the name of God. Of the Son, Christ the Victor, and of the Holy Spirit. With Abraha, the formula becomes, in the name of Rahmanan, of his Messiah, and of the Holy Ghost. Or else in the name of Rahmanan and his Messiah. The major change is that the second person of the Trinity is no longer the Son of God, namely a person of divine essence. The idea of God having a son was unacceptable for the Jews. The second person becomes the Messiah, el-Mesih of God, namely a man who was chosen and anointed by God. In this formulation, Jews can recognize themselves perfectly. For Christians, it presents nothing shocking. The second change is the reduction of the Holy Spirit to a secondary rank, as indicated in the randomness of his invocation. This is a good example of the middle ground that can unite two antagonistic parties. This middle course seems to have been accepted, judging from the success of Abraha's reign. After conquering the entire Arabian Peninsula, Abraha was concerned with the strengthening of cohesion of this vast empire, again using religion. He ordered the construction of the huge church in Sana'a, housing under his dome relics whose veneration was likely to unite all the Christians of the peninsula. This church is called by Arab traditionists al-Qalis, a name derived from the Greek ekklesia, which means precisely church. Some decorated stones of it remain, reused in the great mosque of Sana'a. Here you have, I presented only the two capitals with crosses, but there are many other remains. In the Akhbar Mecca of the traditionist Abu al-Walid al-Azraqi, mid-9th century, there is an accurate description of Al-Qalis with dimensions. The church, which was built on a square podium 10 cubits high, it consisted of three parts called the Beit, Iwan, and Dome. The floor dimensions were, according to our reconstruction, 230 cubits by 120, or 78 meters by 40 meters. The Great Mosque of Sana'a, whose dimensions today are very similar, 78 meters, like Al-Qalis for the length, and for the width, 66 against 40. The successive expansions of Al-Qalis were made at the expense of this building. The first carried out in the northern part, that of the Qibla, wall facing Mecca, is around 705, or between 705 and 715. It resulted in the destruction of the tomb of the prophet Hanzala ibn Safwan, according to al-Azraqi. It is likely that this tradition preserves the memory of the destruction of the relics of Al-Qalis. A fragmentary South Arabian inscription commemorates in 559-560 the construction of the building with expensive materials. It is likely that this is the founding inscription of Al-Qalis. Alors, this is the plan reconstructed by Christian d'Arles, showing the structure of Al-Qalis with the entrance, the Beit, the Iwan, and the dome, the Qubba. Incidentally, it should be the inscription probably mentioning the foundation of Al-Qalis. Incidentally, it should be remembered that the Himyarite calendar was lunar, with additional months in the number of 7 every 19 years, modeled on the Jewish calendar. It is likely that it is Abraha who reformed this calendar to align it with the solar calendar of the Christian at the time of the building of Al-Qalis. At the end of this investigation, some traits of Abraha's personality can be identified. First of all, Abraha is an exceptional war leader who knows how to galvanize his men in the manner of Caesar Bonaparte. This is demonstrated by the unfailing loyalty of his troops when Caleb sends a 2 expedition to bring him down. It is shown also by his reconquest of all Arabia in 4 years. Abraha was a skillful tactician who knew how to reconcile antagonistic parties, as shown by his religious policy. Abraha placed a great importance on political communication. He demonstrates this in 2 ways in Marib. First, he wants the inscription commemorating his achievements to be as large and as beautiful as that of his predecessors. More significantly, Abraha claims to have restored the Dam of Marib when his work is limited to little, and he makes this known by building a massive structure. This is the Dam of Marib, the northern sluice, the southern sluice. The length of the dam is 700 meters. The main channel and the tower built by Abraha is in the southern sluice. This is this tower without any uselessness, commemorating the work of Abraha. The good opinion that the Yemenis has of Abraha is finally a devious and cautious politician who promised a lot to the Byzantine emperor, but finally does not really help him in the war against Persia. Abraha was indeed considered by his contemporaries as a great king. This is what the ancient poetry says. This is demonstrated by the 10 or so individuals named Abraha in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century. This is the only example of the foreign name adopted by the Arabs in genealogies. The good opinion that the Yemenis had of Abraha is also illustrated by the fact that Abraha and his son are included in the genealogy of one of the noblest families of Himyar, the Banu Hasbah, prince of Madha. This positive assessment is well summarized by the historian Tabari. وكان رجلا حليما سيدا شريفا ورعى في دينه من النصرانية. Abraha was a magnanimous noble leader, piously attached to his Christian religion. But in the Arab Muslim scholarly tradition, the good opinion of Abraha soon came into conflict with the very negative judgment of theologians. According to the latter, Abraha was a godless king who had wanted to destroy the house of God. Since moral ugliness obviously translates into physical defects, Abraha became a vindictive and deformed individual nicknamed short-legged, ذو سويقتين. Alors, قرب القعبة ذو سويقتين من الحبشة. This is hadith in al-Bukhari. There are many others. He's described as black, blue-eyed, flat-nosed, and punchy. The Prophet of Islam is even attributed the words dwarfish and with distorted feet, Ufaydir, Udaylir, and Usaylir. He is now the prototype of the enemies of God. Did not a polemical book against Imam Khomeini, published in Egypt a few decades ago, refer to the leader of Iran as the new Abraha? That is the Abraha of our time. In this presentation, I wanted to set the record straight and show that Abraha was a fascinatingly successful adventurer. I hope that I have convinced you of this. Thank you.